Criminal charges in the Flint water crisis, sizing up the political climate in Michigan. The new MSTEP test could be on its way out, and the Harriet Tubman 20, plus more headlines. Stay put. My Week starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hey, and welcome to My Week. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. You know, we've been talking about the Flint water crisis for months, and now the story that captured the nation's attention has reached the criminal level. Felony charges for 3 officials involved in the public health catastrophe. And the state attorney general warns that more charges are coming. So just ahead tonight, we'll take a look at the decision to file criminal charges, and we'll talk about the governor's pledge to drink Flint water for 30 days. Also, it's an election year. We don't have to remind you of that. How will Michigan residents vote in the local races? We'll examine the political climate in the state. Plus, the new state superintendent is pushing for yet another new standardized test, what that means for our kids. And we'll talk about a couple of national headlines that grabbed our attention this week. One story involves Harriet Tubman, the other John McCain and those Republicans. But we do start first with the Flint water crisis tonight. 2 state officials and 1 city worker face multiple felony charges in the lead contamination of Flint's drinking water. The decision to file charges came after an investigation led by Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuette.
I've made it abundantly clear that our system of justice applies to everybody. It's not rigged. No one is above the law, not on my watch. Our investigation, when it is completed, will be thorough. It'll be complete. It'll be exhaustive. We will enforce the law. This Flint crisis team that has been assembled, we will enforce the law. We will protect the victims, the families and citizens of Flint, and we will hold each and every person who breaks the law will be held accountable.
And Schuette says he guarantees more people will be charged in this crisis. Meanwhile, Governor Rick Snyder announced he will drink filtered water from Flint for the next month. And that's where we begin with our My Week contributors tonight. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, you know, we've been saying for months that it was mistakes at every level in the state, but now those mistakes are criminal. Nolan, what did you make of the charges and of the people charged in this case?
Well, I mean, these are very low level. I would think that this was sort of smoking out others. I think that was probably the purpose of yesterday, because Schuette and Andy Arena, Todd Flood kept mentioning over and over again that you know, we hope others will come forward now and tell what they know. And, you know, I think this other people in the government, they're hoping they see these charges and the possibility of people facing prison, and they'll say, wow, you know, I'm not going to wait for them to get me. I'll raise my hand. I think that was the purpose of going out with these sort of small-time early indictments and then saying there's a lot more to come.
What did you make of the charges, Stephen, when you heard?
Yeah, I think Nolan's right. You know, this is about leveraging the threat of criminal prosecution or jail in order to get more people to come forward and say what they did or cooperate with the investigation. I mean, I also think it has an unfortunate effect of sort of distracting from the sort of bigger government responsibility, which won't reach the level of criminality, I don't think. And I don't think you'll see charges, for instance, against the governor's sort of inner circle or the governor himself. But these are the people who were ultimately responsible for what happened, and they are certainly responsible for fixing it going forward. The criminal charges have the effect a little bit of saying, reinforcing the governor's sort of effort to put the blame on someone else. Well, it was not me, it's these bureaucrats who don't know how to do their jobs. And I think that's sort of an unfortunate wrinkle to this.
And hang on. A lot of reporters were asking, okay, so is the governor also a target of this investigation? And Bill Schuette says, you know, we're not limiting anywhere.
Yeah.
And the governor says that he's been cooperating fully.
I'm not sure it won't reach, I don't know if it'll reach the governor, but I'm not sure it won't reach his staff and his inner circle. And I think, if you just look at this as a pure political calculation, and Bill Schuette is running for governor, I mean, if you want to separate yourself from this mess, and which is on the Republicans right now. There's no better way to do it than for a Republican Attorney General to indict other Republicans.
Wait, so do you think these charges are legitimate? You say that just Bill Schuette is using this to pad his political resume?
I don't think that at all, but I think that they're not; those aren't mutually exclusive outcomes.
So
all right. So how intertwined is this? Do you think,
well,
Stephen?
I think politically it is. I think it'll be a real problem for Republicans, and it should be. But I think the criminal statutes we're looking at here that are on the table are all pretty narrow, especially the ones that have to do with environmental regulations. The criminal side of that law is very, it's just narrow, and so it's very difficult to come up with actions that people took that meet the standard of criminal prosecution. Far more civil liabilities generally. Now, if somebody said something that wasn't true in the course of an investigation, now that opens up a different avenue for the prosecutors, perjury or obstruction, those kind of charges. But I think it will be very difficult to move that up the chain much further than where we're seeing. It's just the law doesn't really give you that kind of avenue.
See, I'm not sure, because I think the course Schuette is taking here is not just that you had to act with criminal intent. I mean, he's making the contention that if you have a responsibility and you cut corners on your job, if you don't do your job well, and it results in a danger to public safety, that you are criminally liable. I think that's going to be an interesting case to prosecute.
Yeah.
Well,
and to see how a jury reacts.
And I think it's also an interesting ripple effect, too, about how it affects the rest of the 50,000 civil servants that we have in the state of Michigan. If you work for the state and you're seeing this, what does this tell you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, most people who work for the state and carry out the state's business are entitled to a measure of what they call qualified immunity. In other words, that the things you're doing are on behalf of government, they aren't personal, and so your personal liability is limited. And so I think he may be trying to push the bounds of that and say, listen, in this case, it's somewhat different. I think those would be really tough cases to make. But of course, if you're using that to try to get other people to confess to other things, there's no problem with it. It will be interesting to see. I don't think, and most lawyers who are familiar with the environmental statutes in the state have said it will be very tough to prove.
But there are a lot of paths.
Wrongdoing.
There are a lot of paths out of this thing. I mean, we still, I think, a deep dive into how this Karagandhi Water Authority came to be and who pushed that and why. Could be fertile ground.
Yeah,
and we still have federal investigation as well. You have the U.S. Attorney's Office that is also looking into this too. Let's talk a little bit about the governor coming out this week ahead of the criminal announcements and saying, "Well, I'm going to drink filtered water from Flint for the next 30 days." We've talked a lot about his.
I heard Nolan's doing the same thing.
Nolan, are you doing the same thing?
I am standing in solidarity with the people of Kentucky and drinking only bourbon for the next.
Well, now that would be something I'd like to see for the next 30 days. But let's talk a little bit, because we have talked an awful lot about how the governor has reacted to this situation. And Stephen, that you have been very pointed in saying he hasn't reacted in the right way. It's been a PR disaster for him, that he needs to be more in Flint and talking with people personally, one-on-one. What does this do for you in terms of showing effort that he's in solidarity with the people of Flint?
Well, I mean, it seems a little stilted, right? I mean, the pictures of him doing this have not given you the sense that he is engaging all that much with the people of Flint, so much as he's staging, a PR event again, to try to seem as though he's really focused on that part of it.
Yeah, but he can't win at this point, don't you think?
I mean, that was going to be my next point.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's really hard to think of what he could do at this point that would look substantively different, other than going and talking, en masse with the people of Flint, hold a town hall, an actual town hall, and invite people to come out and tell you what they think. I don't think he's going to do that. It's just not.
And I don't think that helps either. I think everything at this point looks gimmicky. And, the time for those sort of gestures was early. Now, people have formed their opinion. The best thing he can do is just fix the problem. And, one of the reasons he's drinking the Flint water for a month is to encourage people to use this water, because unless you flush that system, it may be a better way to a better approach might be to say to everyone, look, the meters are off for the next week, leave your taps open and get this done all at once.
It's funny that you should say that, because I think there was a line in one of your papers saying, and the state has promised to pay the bills for, the excessive use of the water flushing the system. And I'm saying, you see that word promise, and if I live in Flint, I'm like, meh.
Just shut the meters off and turn on all your taps. I don't know how many days it would take, but if the idea is you need to move water, treated water through that system in order to coat the pipes, then let's just do that. Yeah.
All right, and a program note for you. You can watch the World Channel and Detroit Public TV's joint production looking at the Flint water crisis called Beyond the Tap. It's especially timely given this week's charges. You can see it Monday, April 25th at 7:30 p.m. Mark your calendars. All right, turning now to politics in Michigan. This week was the deadline to run for office in this year's election. There's some interesting names on the ballots, like Robert Fricano running for judge, Todd Corser running for county prosecutor. But really the bigger look is at the political climate in Michigan. What will voters take into account, and could that change the makeup of the legislature? But of course, we still have to take a look at some of these names. Todd Corser, I saw that.
He never seems to get the message, does he?
And it's very interesting, because there's probably so many people out there that would be great to run for office. But this guy, and I don't know what it is, it's like, why is it people like that just feel like, well, I'm going back into the arena. I can win this thing.
Well, I mean, he's a unique case. He's nutty as a fruitcake. And I think just because you file for office doesn't mean you're going to win. I would think it would be very unlikely that people would put him in a position where he was prosecuting other criminals. So, I mean, it's a showy thing to do. He cannot stand not to have his name in the papers, on the internet, to be a subject of conversation. I can't believe even he thinks he could win this.
Well, what do you think, Stephen?
There's a bit of megalomania that you're dealing with
here.
I mean, I thought there were some other, there are a lot. This is one of my favorite times of year, and it follows one of my least favorite times of year, which is trying to sort through all of these candidates for all of these offices and help inform voters about who they are and who to vote for. But you do see lots of people, interestingly, sort of throwing their hats into the ring to say, hey,
what caught your attention?
I thought that the Fricano filing was really interesting. I don't know, I've never thought of him in that way as a judge, but
it's a nice soft spot to land.
Well, obviously he still wants to serve the
6-year and 8-year term.
Yeah,
and,
those are great jobs.
He's in his early 60s. You can ride that out a couple terms, and
we're also going to have
it's another pension.
Right, it's another pension from the county. We also have a city council seat in the city that we have to vote on because there was a vacancy last year. There's some really interesting people who filed for that. People I didn't necessarily expect to see. So I give people a lot of credit for doing that, for raising your hand and saying, hey, I'm going to try to run for this office. I'm going to raise the money and do the organization and try to get the votes. It's not easy, and it's subjecting yourself to more public scrutiny than I think most people believe when they sign those papers.
What about Janice Renfrey running against John Conyers? I thought that was
she's been talking about that for a while.
It's an interesting run. I mean, Conyers has been doing sort of this Weekend at Bernie's act for the last couple terms, and yet he still can't get folks to line up behind an alternative candidate. And the unions for the last couple of cycles have been grumbling and saying, God, this is the last time we're going to support him. And yet it comes around, they'll support him again. And a lot of people would believe it's time for him to go, and yet I think he's going to go out of there.
Voters in that district don't
Absolutely.
believe it. Yeah.
I think he'll go out feet first.
All right. Well, let's take a look at just what the political climate is in general in Michigan, and when we're looking at maybe a possible change up in the House or in the Senate statewise. What are we looking at? What are voters going to be taking into consideration when they go to the polls this year? I mean, are they looking at the roads deal? Are they looking at how the legislature deals with DPS? What do you think, Nolan?
I think it's I think it's like every other race in the country. It's about the general discontent. I don't think specific issues issues are going to say, oh, he voted for that, I'm going to go out there and vote against him. I think there's just a general discontent with the institutions of government. I think in Michigan the most interesting races to watch will be House races. We are now at the end of the 6 years. Those House members who were swept in the 2010 Tea Party wave, their 6 years are up. Now their districts have been redrawn and redrawn more favorably, but Republicans were having trouble recruiting good candidates in those traditionally Democratic districts. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that's the biggest challenge for Republicans is holding the state house.
Do you think they lose the House?
I don't know if they lose it, but I think it's going to be a real fight.
Yeah, so what does the discontent translate to for voters?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure at the state level what that looks like. I mean, you have such a Republican majority, but as Nolan pointed out, you also have a map that's been drawn to specific Republican advantage. So if you're discontent with what you have, really your choice to choose something different is somewhat limited because of the way your district is drawn. Despite
the anger, despite the frustration of voters, and despite the outrageous things they're doing sort of at the presidential level, I don't think a single incumbent congressman has lost a primary yet.
Not that I know. I've not heard of one.
Well,
it doesn't seem to be.
But it's hard to.
Kind of my next question about how the presidential election is going to impact what happens here in Michigan, depending on who's on the top of the ticket.
Less so, perhaps, now that they've ended straight ticket voting in Michigan, and for Republicans, that was certainly opportune timing because you would otherwise perhaps have a lot of folks, particularly Democrats, saying we're just going to, we can't vote for Trump. We're just going to pull the donkey's tail and let it go. So I think it's going to have an impact, but less so because of that new legislation.
What do you think, last word?
I think Trump is going to be devastating to downstate Republicans, regardless of straight ticket voting. Republicans are very fearful of that. How do you get people motivated to go and vote for an important state house or state senate race?
But that's where the money will go. I don't think a whole lot of establishment money is going to go to Donald Trump. I think that money is going to go to congressional races, Senate races, and even state legislative races, because the one thing that Republicans, they haven't managed to win the White House the last 2 cycles, but their gains at the state level have been tremendous since 2008. They now control 19 states, both the governor's office and both houses of the legislature, 33 governor seats. They have a majority control at the state level.
All right. Well, following up now on our conversation about school reform and achievement here in Michigan, news this week that the standardized test that your kids are probably taking right now could be gone next year. Yeah, the MSTEP, which was hastily created to replace the MEP after lawmakers refused to fund another standardized test that was in the works for years. So after 2 years of MSTEP, it could be replaced with another assessment that would test kids 3 times a year instead of once, and starting in kindergarten. And if you're a parent of a school-age kid, you're saying, wait, what? You're going to change this again? Nolan, I'm going to let you have a first crack on that before I take a crack at it.
It's disastrous. And millions of dollars were spent putting this test in place. They revamped curriculums, and now you're going to do it again. I think it's unconscionable that the state school board is even thinking about this, and it reflects sort of their allegiance and their to the teachers unions and their desire not to be held accountable. You wonder why Michigan can't do what other states are doing. No other state is changing its testing method 2 and 3 times in 5 years. You can't get ahead at that pace.
And you can say that the Michigan Department of Education and the school board, it's unconscionable, but people could also place a lot of blame, Stephen, on the legislature, who all of a sudden decided to pull funding from the test that had been vetted for years to replace the MEP because of what they didn't like what the Department of Ed was doing.
You've got everybody sort of pulling at different strings here, trying to make a point, but they're all trying to make different ideological points. No one is saying, here, let's sit down as a group together and figure out what the curriculum ought to look like.
Well, we never can do that
in state schools. And then, the test should follow the curriculum. The test should be devised after you have that discussion about how you want schools to look and what you want them to do. We never start there. We always start with
and that's
let's get rid of this
exactly
test and bring a new one in.
But the objective groups, people who aren't on one side or the other of the political debate and divide, say that MSTEP is a good test. The Michigan,
it's a decent test.
The Midwest Education Trust said, you know, this is a good test. Let's give it time to work. The worst thing you can do to teachers is say, okay, you've got to put all this effort into preparing you to teach this test and to devise your curriculum so your kids do well on this test, and then next year a whole nother
something different.
It is not fair at the classroom level.
It's not fair, and also that you'll have no really idea of where we are achievement-wise in the state if you keep saying, well, we have to wait a couple more years for this until we get a really good assessment, and then you're changing it all over again. My other thing with this, when I saw this, was they're going to be assessed 3 times a year instead of the MSTEP and the MeWeek was once.
All they'll be doing is
and then they're also saying, well, but maybe you can opt out of one of them like mid-year. And I'm like, now wait a minute. It gets a little confusing.
It's just sort of, it's catch as catch can. There is no strategy. There's no sort of overall protocol that's being used here. It's everybody's just sort of grabbing at what here's an interesting idea. Why don't we try it like this, or why don't we do that?
Yeah, and I mean, you got a new superintendent. He doesn't like this test because he wasn't part of putting it together. So we're going to get a new, a new test. What about the next time we get a new superintendent? I mean, you can't change with every change of personnel.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. All right, and finally, tonight's headlines. Okay, there was plenty to pick from about headlines. And it started off as Hamilton dodges a bullet and gets to stay on the 10. But then really the real headline is Harriet Tubman on the 20. I'm going to start with you, Nolan. What did you think of that announcement yesterday from the Treasury?
It's probably a good time to freshen up the dollars. But I found it amusing that, okay, instead of just taking Jackson off, they're going to stick him on the back. And then, they're not going to take Hamilton off, but they're going to stick a lot of other people on the back of his bill. And it just strikes me as they're doing a whole lot of this at a time when cash is basically disappearing from our economy. I mean, who carries cash? I mean, most transactions are now done either by credit
What's in
card
your wallet right now?
or online.
You have cash.
Yeah, how much cash do you have in your wallet right now, Nolan?
I never have enough.
That's the right answer.
That is the right answer.
But it is true. I mean, you talk to these particularly younger folks. You talk to millennials, and
they don't use a lot of bills.
They don't use a lot of cash.
You're sounding very close to the get off my lawn, kids.
There.
You better start carrying some cash, kids. You never know what could happen.
But it's surprising how many days you can get by without any cash in your pocket.
It's true.
It's true. I do walk around
Swipe
actually
the cards.
without a lot of cash.
The only thing you really need cash for now is to just give tips to the valet guy.
That's what I say.
Oh, really? That's a very 1% kind of comment there, Nolan.
You don't want to cheat the people who are doing good work.
Really in touch with the common man. All right, what did you make of it? And I think the pick of Harriet Tubman
that's super significant.
Yeah.
I think there is a odd historical connection there between her struggle as a slave and the role that money, of course, played in the slave trade, and that the role that slaves and the slave trade played in launching the finance system here in the country. There's some real irony there about that, but it's great that they'll put an African American woman on a bill.
And I thought it was interesting because a lot of people who have seen Hamilton the musical, I know Stephen's seen it at least 5 times,
saved him.
We're lobbying, and that's pretty
Speaking
much
of money,
that's a big reason why it was saved. Is this resurgence and interest in
out.
Alexander Hamilton, which I find fascinating as well.
Yes, people should be interested in Alexander Hamilton anyway. I mean, very important contributions to.
They should read the Federalist Papers, Stephen.
Should read all the Federalist Papers, right?
Yeah.
Well, that would be
51. He wrote 51 of them.
That would be progressive.
All right. Hey, and before we leave tonight, there's more and more news pointing that it's going to be a contested convention in Cleveland. John McCain says, "Well, I'm not going to go to the convention, the Republican convention." Why would he not want to go?
I don't know. He's facing a tough race in Arizona. I hope he knows what he's doing. He's got his own struggle. I don't know. I mean, I tend to believe that it will be a contested convention, but New York, this week, gave Donald Trump a lot of delegates. And if that pace continues, he may squeak by that 1237. So we'll see. It's going to Pennsylvania next, right? John Kasich will have a strong showing there. He won't win, but he may keep.
Well, and Pennsylvania has this weird allocation
weird
of
delegates.
So if he can keep Trump, if the two of them can keep Trump, Cruz, and Kasich under 50%, you know, you're not going to beat him in delegate count, but you may keep him from getting 1237. I think that's the strategy now.
I don't know, New York, they lit up the Empire State Building red for Trump's victory there.
Wow.
Did you just roll your eyes?
I did a little.
He's a New Yorker.
He's a New Yorker.
He is a New Yorker.
All right, and we'll continue to watch that. Thanks so much, guys. That is going to do it for MiWeek. Make sure you find us at MiWeek.org. We are also on Twitter and on Facebook. I'm Christy McDonald. For all of us here at Detroit Public TV, we will see you next week. Take care.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.